Hello and welcome to this week's episode in ARK development. We're continuing on our map that we've made in our previous weeks. This week we're going to talk about Dino Spawns, and we're also going to talk a little bit about game development and the map design process. So to start out, I want to talk about why we wouldn't do some more landscape type things, and instead we're sort of jumping ahead to Dino Spawns. And for this, I really want to talk about game design and how this works. If you are just curious about how Dino Spawns work, I'll put a link in the description below to a spot where you can jump ahead and just learn about the Dino Spawns. But I'm going to continue talking about game design and development and how map design and level design works with those two things. So to do this, we need to actually look at a picture of our map. We need to sort of think about how all these different areas interact and create a flow state. And if you don't know what a flow state is this area between challenge and boredom where a player has fun in a game. And the way that you do this is by creating challenges, letting them master them, creating challenges, letting the player master them. That's how you do it in a traditional game. But as we know, ARK is not a traditional game, so it doesn't quite fit the same type of structure. Thus, if they keep doing the same thing and they just master it, you get this onset of boredom. Or if they start in an area that's too difficult, they have a lot of anxiety, the challenges are high, and they drop out. They're not in this middle ground, which is good for players having fun and enjoying your game or your map. So on our map, there's a few things that we need to consider. First, we need to consider vertical altitude, and this comes in a couple of different forms. The first is the starting location. Where you start is going to dictate some things about your map, and something called the zone of influence, which is really more for open world sandbox type of games, much like ARK. And what the zone of influence is just the area around the player that they can see and interact with. Players are likely to do something that they see, so on and so forth. So when we pick a starting location, when we have a starting location in a game, there's two different directions that you can take vertically for a new player. If you have your player here, and there's a hill up this way and a hill down this way, they can either go up, down, or in some cases they can stay at the same level. However, this is usually uncommon because good level design does not maintain a flat level, as you'll see in a second. The player's eyesight naturally goes down. They associate down with easier, up with harder. This is something that we see in ARK. When we're on the beach and we look up into the forest or the mountains, it is almost always harder and more difficult to survive up there. And we're in the mountains and we look down at the beach, it is almost always easier to survive there. This is done for a very specific reason. When a player looks down at something, they can see a multitude of options below them. This allows them to make a properly educated choice, and it is an easier challenge for the player. When they're looking up, they don't always have all of the information, and the exact opposite is true. They'll have to react to information that they get on the fly, and it is a more difficult challenge to go up than it is to go down. So with that in mind, we need to dictate a few places where a player will start. We can say that players will start in locations on the beach. That's perfectly fine. We can have all sorts of start locations around. But typically some players will like a more challenging start. So we'll need to have some start locations that vary from easy to hard, with more being on the easier side than those being on the hard side. But start locations are only a minimal part of what we're talking about with game design. We need to talk about open world game dynamics, and to do that we need to understand the MDA framework. That stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Mechanics are like the rules, like where you can build an ARK, where you can't, things like that. The dynamics is the gameplay to the user. What do those rules let you do? And we'll talk about this more in a second because this is the whole point of what I'm talking about. And aesthetics are the look and the feel of the game. So the dynamics for ARK are where areas overlap. And what I mean by this is if you have an easy zone, a moderate zone, and a challenging zone, there are areas that overlap. You can start in the easy zone and you can look up and see a challenging monster and know to come down to a lower zone. Or you can start in a medium zone and sort of overlap with the easy zone, and it's somewhere in between easy and in middle of the road difficulty, and it's more exciting than the previous time that you played because it's different. And that's because the gameplay dynamic is different. The amount of dinosaurs that you're seeing is different. The variations of dinosaurs you're seeing is different. There's a place where a T-Rex eats a dodo, where hard overlaps easy. And that's fine and all, in theory, but on a map, this looks more like this. There are many different spawns, and all those different spawns interact with all other spawns, and it creates several different pockets of dynamic gameplay. Places where spawns overlap create a different game flow and a different game dynamic for the player playing the game. So we have to be careful about where we're putting our spawns, and that's sort of why I'm talking about the game design in relation to dinosaur spawns. Because if you have a T-Rex and a Titanosaur in the starting area, it creates a game dynamic that isn't fun for players. If there's a Giga eating you when you first start playing the game, if we go back to our flow state diagram, you have a really high challenge. It increases a lot of anxiety, and you're not in your happy, fun flow state. So if we have areas that are appropriate for where we're playing the player, and we're conscious of the dynamic states that we're going to create in our games, then we can make a much better and a more user-friendly map. It's worth noting that all of these unique overlapping areas is sort of one of the things that allows you to play ARK a few times on a different map. You'll notice if you play the same game style over and over and over again, you typically get bored. But if you adventure and start a base on a new island, it captures some of the dynamic fun again of the game, and it increases your interest in the game. So with our lesson in game design done, we're going to talk about some of the process that goes through in creating a dinosaur spawning zone in ARK. I'm just going to show you once, and then off screen I will do this for the map. For edification purposes, there are 3 things that we need when it comes to creating a zone for a dinosaur. I've moved the player start over to a place where we can have a nice open zone, and we can look at how some of these dinosaurs spawn in and what process it takes to spawn them in. So up here in our modes, we're going over to our place thing, and we're going to search for NPC, and we see that there's 3 different things here: the Npc Zone Manager, the Npc Zone Spawn Volume, and the Npc Zone Volume. We need all of these. So the first thing that we're going to do is drag our NPC zone into our map. And we're going to change the scale of it. We're just going to drag it out a little bit, make it wider, make it taller, and we're going to make sure that it's above the ground. This isn't a particularly flat area. I should have probably thought of that, but it'll do. So we have our NPC zone volume here. And it's worth noting that since this is a map that is a large scale map, so, this is a very large map, and this is a tiny spawn area on this map, it's worth noting that we can't just have it called NPC Zone Volume. We're actually going to need to name this. So if we come here on our Details tab, we can just type whatever we want. We'll call this Test Zone. can't see my keyboard with my mic in the way. So we have our test zone volume, and that's one of the 3 things that we need to make our area. The second thing that we need to do is take our NPC Zone spawn volume and drag it in. So this we need to line up to be very similar to the box that we just made for our zone volume. So with that in mind, this isn't perfect, but it'll do for the purpose of demonstration. We also need to rename this NPC zone volume. When we're actually making our map, we're going to name these based off of the location and some of the vegetation around the areas. I'm just making sure that I name these so that I can delete them later when we actually do it. The final step that we need to do is take our NPC Zone Manager and we're going to drag it into the scene. If you zoom in on it, we'll actually move this into our scene a little bit. You see that there's like this little raptor head, or I'm not sure, whatever it is. But it exists. And this is sort of the thing that makes all the magic happen. For this zone manager, this is going to handle a subsection of zones. If you have multiple beach areas and you want all the different beach areas to happen, you can have one NPC zone manager manage all of your different beach areas. You can have one manage all of your different snow areas, so on and so forth. They have to be separate if they're handling different locations. But for our purpose here, we're only managing one zone volume and one spawn volume. So we need to create an element in our linked zone volumes, and we need to create an element in our linked zone spawn volumes. You'll notice that each of these have a drop-down list. Here we can see our renamed test zone volume from above, and here we can see our spawn volume test from above. These are the 2 different parts that we dragged in. It's pretty simple. If we have more than one, you add another element, create that other one. We don't actually need that second one, so I'm just going to delete it. So scrolling down, we can set the minimum desired number of NPCs. If I pull this in slightly, we can see a little bit more of what's going on here with our text. So we can set our minimum number of desired NPCs. I want at minimum in this area for there to be 3 dinosaurs. At most, let's say 15. If you find that this is too many dinosaurs, you can change this desired number of NPC multiplier. It's kind of a description that doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's the multiplier which controls the number of dinosaurs in the scenes. This is similar to the server setting where you can control the number of dinosaurs on the entire server. This does it for just the scenes pertaining to this zone manager though. I'm going to leave it at 1. We're fine with 3 and 15. And we're going to save our scene as it lags the first time you hit play. Once we've set that up, there's only a few things left to do to get this working. We'll need to find on this place where it says NPC spawner entries container object. That's also not a great identifier, but once it rebuilds the class hierarchy, we can look at all the different biomes that the ARK developers have created for us from this drop-down list. So here we see all of our entries into this NPC entries container object, and you'll notice that they have some type of modifier at the end which describes the biome for which they exist. So we have caves, we have tech caves, we have grasslands, pelicans, wrecks, snow, swamp, anything that we can really think of, including unicorn. I've never tried that. I might try it. I'm sort of moderately confused by it. But so let's say that we suggest the Dino Spawn Entries jungle. Once we select this Dino Spawn Entries jungle, this is going to tell our NPC zone volume and our NPC spawn volume which dinosaurs to spawn. It's going to give us shaders for all those dinosaurs, which we need to compile. It's going to allow us to spawn these dinosaurs once we hit play. But before we can hit play, there's actually one last thing that we need to do on our zone manager, and then one final thing to do in our world settings. In our zone manager, you might see this never spawn in water and only spawn in water options. You need to actually have one of the two of these checked. It doesn't work without it. So since we're on land, we never want to spawn in water. And that's it. We're done with our NPC Zone Manager. And we can go to our world settings. So we need to go to Window, World Settings. It pops up over here. And we just need to check this thing that says Editor, Enable NPC Spawners. So now when we hit play, we can see that we have a number of spawns. It looks like a Carno, there's Xenosaurus, a Raptor, Parasaur, Dilos. So yeah, that's a quick, pretty easy guide on how to create a dino spawner. Eventually the goal is to do this for our entire map and do it in a way that creates a dynamic state for the player that is both fun, challenging, and steers them away from boredom. If we can create a pathway up to harder areas so players can have multiple locations and multiple islands where they can experience most of the game, that will create a map that most players can play multiple times through. Thank you so much for watching this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Hopefully you'll join us next week.